Good morning, everyone. Welcome this morning to our 4th annual nonprofit forum with Hitachi America. We're glad to have you all here this morning. I'm Rebecca Tekula, the director of the Wilson Center for Social Entrepreneurship here at PACE. My favorite part of this event is to be in the audience and to hear from our fantastic panelists. And to get us moving, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce my fabulous partner at Hitachi, Cindy Hecht, who has been a tireless supporter of this event and has put in so much effort each year. It really is a true partnership with Hitachi. So I'd just like to thank her and welcome her up to tell you a little bit about Hitachi and then get us started.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for being here today. We're thrilled to have, I think this is our 5th forum with Pace University, and I know we've got a fabulous group of speakers here, and I don't want to spend too much time, but I did want to call your attention to just 2 items in your packet about Hitachi. The first is our corporate giving guidelines. This is something that I get asked about often, and I'm sure it's of interest to some people here. I just want to spend a few minutes for people who are not familiar with the way Hitachi gives to explain our process. Hitachi has, since our foundation was established in 1985, felt very strongly that our employees in our different locations, and we have 108 companies in North America. 3 are in Westchester. But our foundation has always felt that our employees who live in our local communities are the people best able to make the giving decisions on behalf of the company in those communities. And so the way our giving is done is through a volunteer committee of employees, and they have to be below a vice president level. And our employees volunteer to serve in this community action committee, and every March they decide a focus area for their giving. And because we're on a Japanese fiscal year, so our fiscal year begins in April. And every March our committee makes a decision on what issue or area they will focus on for the year for the charitable giving. And the application doesn't change much year to year. The only thing that changes is the focus area. For our fiscal 2012, which ends at the end of this month, it was the environment and education. My suggestion to anyone here who's looking for grant money would be to send me an email at the end of March to find out what the committee's focus is for our fiscal 11 or fiscal 13. And I don't know the answer to that yet. The committee will meet in a week, and I'll have more information then. The other piece of paper and I should mention that with a gift from Hitachi, the money is matched dollar for dollar with a grant from the Hitachi Foundation. So our grantees get 2 checks, one from Hitachi America, and then an equal amount from the Hitachi Foundation, who's been a wonderful partner in our giving program. The other piece of paper I want to call your attention to is our volunteer activity sheet. We have a very active employee volunteer program, which was started in 2009. And under this program, all of our employees get half a day off every 6 months. And again, this is because we're on a Japanese fiscal. So instead of 4 quarters, we have 2 6-month terms. So our employees get half a day off every 6 months to volunteer. And I manage that program, and we send our employees out purposefully in small groups, no more than 6 to 8 people. So we try not to make the volunteer activity onerous for the nonprofit. And we're looking for done in a day or done in a half a day type projects. And I offer 1 to 2 activity choices a month for our employees. So if your organization has a project that would fit those parameters, and you could use a small group of people for a project or some extra help one day, I hope that you will send me an email and we can set something up. The final thing I just wanted to say was, I know we have a regular group of attendees who come to this event every year. And for those of you who were here, I think 2 years ago, when we did our focus was social enterprise organizations, one of our speakers, Pam Allen, was here talking about her wonderful organization, Lit World. And today is Lit World Read Aloud Day. And if you Google litworld.org, you can read about the wonderful work Pam has done since she was here 2 years ago. And she's asking people around the world today to spend a few minutes reading aloud to a child, a friend, anyone. So I would ask that you please try to support her effort today and at least go on the website and see what she's doing. So thank you very much and enjoy today's program.
My name's Hillary Nepper. I am still the newest faculty member in the Masters of Public Administration program. I hope that's going to be changing shortly, and you'll have fresher faces than mine. We are a 34-year-old graduate program here. We have about 150 students in the program, and we have tracks in nonprofit management, which is why a lot of our students are here today. We have tracks in healthcare, we have tracks in government, and also environmental sustainability. And I will say that I plug sustainability no matter which students I have in a class, because I think it's something we all have to worry about, and we're all dealing with on some level. But I wanted to take just a few minutes, if it's all right, and just hit a few hot trends and just some things for us to be thinking about. But before I do, how many of you are currently enrolled students here at Pace? Would you mind raising your hand? Okay, great. I assume mostly nonprofit track for most of you. How many of you are faculty or staff from Pace? Just to see it? Okay, great. And how many of you are other? How many of you would love to be students here? All right. We're glad to have you here. And can everybody hear me? Is it all right? You can hear me? All right. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about, and I'll go quickly because I know you mostly want to hear from our speakers. And the way I would like to work it is to go through my presentation, introduce our next speaker, and let all of our speakers make their presentations. Write down your questions so you can hold on to them, and then we'll do our questions at the end. I'll moderate the questions. All of my students who are in the audience, if you do not ask questions, there goes your grade. And if you think you're safe because you're in capstone, you're not. So make sure you're asking some good questions. I know you've got a lot of questions, and what usually happens is we finish the discussions, people ask questions, and then our speakers are mobbed at the end by individual questions. So we'll try and hold it because everyone's going to be interested in that. All right, so here are some of the big concerns that we've got going for us in the nonprofit sector. And one of the things that's really neat about the classroom these days in nonprofit management is we're dealing with all of these issues. And we're talking with our students and how, as managers and administrators, do we address the issues that are affecting us. Fallout from the recession, can we all agree there's been some? Absolutely. At the bare minimum, how many of you have been seeing increasing demands for your services during the recession? We've all felt that. We've even felt it in the classroom. More people are coming back to school to get some more tools to redefine themselves. The continued economic uncertainty, that's a little tough for us, and it hits us in many ways. We worry about it in our charitable donations. We worry about it in the demands for services. We worry about it in the stability of our public funding. So we've got all these different elements and what those needs are that are going to be the elements that we have to address in order to successfully continue to deliver the services that our community desperately needs. We're looking at safety net cuts, unfortunately, and we're looking at deep safety net cuts. We're seeing it from the federal level on down to the local level. We're even seeing it here in Westchester, which in general is a fairly affluent community with pockets of significant need. So when we're feeling it in Westchester, we know that that's a real issue that's affecting everybody around the country. We're also looking at donor fatigue. Everybody agree? Yeah. How many of you are opening up your direct mail campaigns these days, or is it going straight into the trash? Hiding and doing your caller ID, I'm not answering that call, deleting the emails. We're all feeling that pinch, and we're sticking with the funders that we know we're sticking with the programs we want to fund, so it makes it that much more challenging and competitive for us. So I think that's something to think about. But one of the things that still seems to work is having a personal connection. Having some connection to that organization. A good friend tells you it's the greatest thing ever. These things are still working for us, so we have to learn how to market this a little better. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of need. Now we've got need that's international as well as local. So how does your nonprofit stand out and reach out to the people not only that you need to serve, but the people who need to support your services? And I think that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. One of the big concerns is the greater transparency and accountability. How many of you have seen all of the headlines in the paper about the outrageous salaries CEOs are making in the nonprofit sector? $200,000 for a CEO. I'm thinking, this is Westchester. That's like poverty wages these days in Westchester. So we do have some. I'm not saying there aren't some wages that are very high, but for the most part, we're looking at a lot of visibility and transparency, and people are demanding accountability. However, I think as professionals, we have to make sure people understand that just because you work for a nonprofit doesn't mean you need to be in subsidized housing and on food stamps yourself. And I think that's one of the things that we as professionals need to address. And then one of the other concerns is that we're looking to outsource some of our own services as not-for-profits so that we can save money. We're trying to do things much more leanly. And I think those are some of the issues that are really affecting us as we move forward. We're not a nonprofit per se, we're just bad businessmen. All right, so that's why we're in the nonprofit sector, because we can't cut it in the business world. Wrong. The nonprofit sector is comprised of really great business people. And why do I say that? Because you're still succeeding when everybody else is going down. All right? So and I don't know how well you can see this, but in general, the dark number, the not-for-profit employee hirings, what we're doing, our growth rate, we're still growing. Now, you could say the reason we're growing is because the need is growing and we have to keep pace. But the reality is you'd be going under if you weren't doing things well and if you weren't able to continue to raise the money and revenues that you need. So nonprofits, I just want you to get that right out of your mind if I have any lurking MBAs here. Nonprofits are great business people, and they have to be because they are doing so much with so little every day. And I just wanted to point that out to you, just a quick visual. And I promise I'm not going to talk too long. My students get worried when I start talking. All right. Of all the United States nonprofit jobs, more than half are in the healthcare field. Are we going to see more changes in that? What do you think? With the Affordable Care Act? Yes. Absolutely. So the healthcare is going to keep growing. And let's face it, is healthcare a right or a privilege? These are questions we're asking. So therefore, does it belong in the for-profit sector or the not-for-profit sector? Right now, we're covering our bases. It's everywhere. Right? We're everywhere. Then we've got education, like PACE, which is a not-for-profit educational institution. And then 13% are social assistance, the human services side of things. From what you hear about our safety nets, wouldn't you think that would be a lot bigger? Because we're always talking about all the deadbeats that are just living off of the nonprofit services, but really, that's a smaller section of it. So I think it's important to look at. But this is huge in terms of employment. All right, the impact, more than 10 million jobs in the nonprofit sector. And I think that's really important because look at the industries. When we talk about who's important, which industries we need to support as a country, which ones are worthy of our attention when we're looking at it economically, which one would you be paying some attention to? Would you be paying attention to us, the nonprofit sector, over 10 million jobs? Absolutely. Do we get that sort of attention in the media nationally? Not necessarily. I don't see it. And in Westchester, it's not chump change either. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Some food for thought. We're the big dogs, right? We may not be the seniors on campus, but we're really kind of the juniors when you look at it. We're pretty big. All right, so here's the good news in our top trends. Now, do you notice that I have a couple of things that were also on my bad news slide? The concerns to be worried about? Why do you think I would put a couple of them up here as good news? They're both. They're both. They're absolutely both. Greater transparency and an increased demand for accountability, that works in our favor. that absolutely can work for us. Yes, it's a pain in the butt. Yes, it's more administrative work for us. But on the other hand, it can do a great job in getting our message out to the community and letting people know what we're doing and welcoming everybody in. Because then that greater awareness means more people are aware of the concerns and the problems that are going on. The outsourcing, that's an opportunity. We may be outsourcing, but it also means somebody may be outsourcing an element that we do very well to us. And we're seeing that in mental health, right, in Westchester County. So I think it's important to think about that. One of the positives is that we're nimble as nonprofits. We're resilient. That's sustainable. Those are business practices that can continue, and they're strengths that we can build upon. So I want to just remind everybody of that. Having that ability to change and to turn quickly really goes in our favor. Social media, it's no longer just a passive thing. It's out there, we're raising money, we're seeing increases, we're seeing business conducted through social media, we're seeing lots of stuff going on in the healthcare field with social media and improving health outcomes and surveillance. So it's a really active element that you need to make sure you understand and you're using it correctly and dynamically for your organization. And our boards of directors need to be better informed. These are tough times, right? We've got to give them as many tools as possible to do the job that they're sitting there to do. And part of that can be difficult because it's an educational piece, and part of it is difficult because they're resistant, and part of it's difficult because they don't have the time. But we have to educate them, and we need to get them the tools they need to do what we need from them. Another opportunity for us is this cross-sector collaboration. It's always been there. How do we build upon it? How do we work together as agencies? It's highly competitive out there, so how can I maximize my ability to succeed by partnering with somebody similar to me or very different so that we can really get things done? Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take our partnerships and working together. And then finally, I want you to know that charitable giving rose by 4% in 2011. Up from 2010, not quite as much in 2012, but this was still up. It wasn't down, right? Now, we had something happen here. It gave us a bump. They're saying Hurricane Sandy probably gave us a bit of a bump for our charitable giving for 2012. And a lot of that extra giving was in the Northeast, so there is some evidence to that. However, overall, charitable giving has gone up. It has not declined. That doesn't mean that you individually as a nonprofit might not have seen a bit of a decline recently, because many have. The smaller ones, though, have actually done very well, or smaller organizations. So it's interesting. Just a couple of things in nonprofits for here in Westchester that I wanted you to look at, and I took this from Dr. Tekula's report, and blatantly stole it, but I'm crediting her fully with that, so it's okay. I did cite her. But I just wanted you to see, look at the growth in the assets, look at the growth in wages, and look at the average salary. Not a lot of money, but we're getting better. And you know, this is of course with your master's degree. We want you to have this. But I remember the days when, you know, your master's degree got you to 18. So, and that wasn't that long ago. But these are some really important facts for us to keep in mind. We are a growth industry, and we're meeting a need, but we're also a big employer and making a big difference in our community. Now, we have our real panelists, because I was just a warm-up. And what I want to give you a couple of things to think about. Dr. Dobroff has to leave early, so we'll go through our panelists. So those of you, write down your questions for her early on and ask them early. Do not hide, do not be shy, don't wait, because she won't be here to talk to you at the very, very end. So let me just give you a little bit about Dr. Dobroff. She's the Executive Director of Cancer Support Team, and it's a licensed home care program, and they offer free professional support services to those affected by cancer in Lower Westchester. She's also Assistant Clinical Professor of Preventive Medicine in the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So she's not busy at all, and it was very easy for her to tuck us in today into her schedule. She's got an extensive background in social work, and she's received numerous awards for her work. And I would just like to welcome her with a big hand.
Thank you, Hillary, so much. Is it on?
I think
Yes.
it's on. We know.
Or I'll just talk very loudly. That was a great overview of all the things that we are dealing with, certainly at Mount Sinai, at Cancer Support Team and many other nonprofits. Today, I've entitled my presentation, "To Bill or Not to Bill, That is the Question." I'm going to be telling you a story of a multiple-year process, exploring this question at Cancer Support Team and the evolution of our thinking and the kinds of skills that are needed to deal with this kind of long-term issue. So it's a story of adapting one's thinking as you gather information, as Hillary said, being nimble, being flexible, working with your board and staff as your thinking evolves, relying on those with more expertise than you have to bounce ideas off, not being afraid to ask questions even when you worry that the questions are stupid ones, and trusting the process of an initiative that takes a long time and still isn't finished. As Hillary explained, Cancer Support Team is a nonprofit home care program. We're licensed by the New York State Department of Health. We've been around since 1978. We have nurses and social workers, case managers, who go into the home, see people at our office. We see people at any stage of cancer diagnosis. And very uniquely, everything we do is provided free of charge and without regard to insurance coverage. So that means we don't bill insurances. What I want to do, which will give you a better idea specifically of our nursing services, because that's what I'm really focusing on today, the question of should we bill for our nursing services, I want to show you a very brief video about what we do as nurses. So those are our wonderful nurses. And in around 2006, 3 years into my being hired at Cancer Support Team, and I was the first executive director, we began looking at the billing question. And it was prompted by an increased demand for our services. We were serving many more underserved people, people who are uninsured, underinsured, financially needy, and of course our expenses were rising. So with the board, we decided to hire a consultant who had a nursing background and also an expertise in billing for home care services. So she came in, spent a lot of time with our staff, with me. She assessed our organization. She looked at nursing documentation, scope of practice, data on home visits, on the amount of time that the nurses were spending with patients. Through this process, there was a great side benefit that I hadn't expected. She clarified the multiple roles of our nurses. She helped us create a lot of efficiencies, both in terms of nursing documentation and also some of the processes that we had in our office. During this time, it was, of course, very important to work closely with our staff. This was a big culture change for them to bring in an outside person to take a look at their work. I needed to continually, as did the board, deal with their concerns about the changes in their practice that we were hoping to achieve, the changes in documentation. In addition, through this process, importantly, I learned that licensed home care agencies like Cancer Support Team can't bill Medicare. We can only bill Medicaid if we provide home health aid services, which we don't. But we can bill private insurers. So I thought, okay, so let's move forward, and we'll get ourselves ready to bill the private insurers. And about 1/3 of our patients have private insurance. So we were ready. The consultant advised me to start with one of the bigger insurers where the case managers were big referral sources to us. So the case managers knew us, they knew our services. In fact, we were likely saving them money keeping their patients out of the emergency department in the hospital. So I optimistically and probably naively felt that this would be a piece of cake. and how wrong I was. I practiced the spiel that I'd make on the telephone to the insurer to set up the meeting to begin to contract with them so that they would reimburse us for the nursing services. And I'm sure some of you in the audience might already know the outcome. I called that insurer where the case managers were referring to us, didn't get a call back, but I'm very persistent. So I called again and no response. So I decided to try another one of the big insurers. I called and no response. So I then, a few weeks later, called someone who I knew, who was a retired senior executive at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and he cut to the chase. He said, "Why would they pay you tomorrow when you're providing free services today?" He said, "Besides, you have about 100, 150 patients with private insurance. It'll cost them more to work on the contract with you than you would bring in an added benefit to them." So I thought, oh, no wonder they're not calling me back. Throughout the project, in the meantime, I discussed with the board each step, and this was very important. I updated them on the progress, received their feedback. They were very pleased that it was progressing and very interested in the outcome. And it generated lots of good discussions about billing, about our patients, about mission issues. There were some reservations about billing insurance. In fact, our co-founder, who had created the organization in 1978, was our board president in 2006, and he had created this agency where he didn't want people to worry about money. You just provide the service, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to raise the funds. But of course, there were others on the board who were all for bringing in revenue, especially when it paid for what we were already doing. So once I was clear from my Blue Cross Blue Shield person that we most likely wouldn't get a call back, I went back to the board. I discussed those benefits of this project in terms of clarifying the role, talking about mission, but we decided we're going to table the issue for now. I went back to the staff, and some of the staff expressed relief. They were glad that insurance companies weren't going to dictate to them. You saw in the video, Sharon Lavery, who talks about why she went to nursing school was to practice nursing. And that's what she feels like she's able to do a cancer support team, which of course is a wonderful thing. So. So not billing insurances gives the nurses freedom to practice as they would like. Fast forward to 2011. I revisited this issue with someone who had been the medical director of a large insurer. He was a former administrator at a hospital, and in other words, very knowledgeable about this issue. He was also a consumer of our services, so he knew our organization very well. And he said to me, "Why would you bill? It will change the mission and culture of your organization. You have a niche, you have this uniqueness, especially in these times." He said, "I can get you connected with an insurer who'll contract with you, but why would you want to do that? And as an aside, it's going to cost you so much more to create an infrastructure to bill, and that's going to outweigh the benefits for you." So, rather than conceptualizing this issue as one where little cancer support team can't get the attention of the big insurers, we can see it rather in a proactive stance. We're making a decision that we will continue to maintain our mission of providing services free of charge and without regard to insurance coverage. It's our niche, it's what makes us unique, and it's also wonderful for our patients. So, as long as we can raise the money to cover our expenses and meet the need of our patients and families as best as we can, we're not going to bill insurances. The board was in agreement, the staff was in agreement, and it was a wonderful reaffirmation of our mission and the way we deliver services. So last fall, 6 months ago, I met with that same man who was the director of the large insurer, the former hospital administrator, and consumer of our services. And I wanted to thank him for his great advice and update him on our thinking, tell him about how we've reaffirmed our mission. We're not going to bill. We're staying true to what CST is all about. And then we began to schmooze about what's going on in healthcare, and specifically about the Affordable Care Act. And he thought for a minute and he said, you know, in the next few years, you might actually want to look at billing for your services. So the story continues. One day we might bill, or we may never bill. But with the changing landscape in the nonprofit world, and especially in the world of healthcare, it's critical, from my point of view, to do the following. Let your thinking evolve. Be flexible to different ways of thinking. Keep your board and staff abreast of your changing thinking and get their feedback. Don't be afraid to throw out to them your thoughts and how your thinking is evolving. Find people who know more than you do about the issues that you struggle with and pick their brain. Keep asking questions, even if they're the same questions over and over. And most importantly, trust the process. Thank you.
Okay, so I already have a list of questions, so if none of you come up with any, I've got time for that. All right, I think next we've got Rubina Shep. Rubina is homegrown. She is here, although I believe we did steal you from Seton Hall University, and that's been to our favor. Rubina is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Placement. It's a long title, but she's responsible for leading the entire enrollment, financial aid, and career services initiatives here at Pace University. And under her leadership, it's grown exponentially. And we now have 12,000 students over 6 schools and colleges. And you've got, what, 20 new graduate programs under your leadership. And our employment rates for PACE graduates have consistently been 10% higher than the national average. So those of you who are not currently employed but are thinking of returning to graduate school, clearly PACE is the place to be. And Rubina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? I'm rarely accused of being too quiet. But as someone who has spent my whole career in government and nonprofit work, it's really a great opportunity to be here talking to this group and telling you a little bit about some of the things that I've learned along the way and some of the challenges that we are coping with right now in higher education. Something that's not on my bio was that I actually started in the nonprofit world in anti-poverty programs back in the 1970s when I was in college. And so I'd say if there was one unifying theme of all of the things that I've done in government and nonprofit, it's that it's all been about the future. So working with anti-poverty groups, then moving into working at a very large park system whose primary focus was on preserving open space for future generations. And now working in higher education. And I feel very privileged to have had this kind of a career. And I really love higher education because it is so much about the future of this country, the future of the world. It's so vital that we educate our residents. So the theme of today's program is change. And I am prepared to talk about some of the changes that we are dealing with here in higher education. Firstly, one of the big changes is the changing demographics. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the articles that have been out since the last census was taken about how the makeup of the country is changing. But what maybe you're not as aware of is how things are changing here in the Northeast. And we are in about, I think, year 2 of a 10-year decline in the number of students who will be going to college. And so for anyone in the higher education sector, that of course is a big challenge. So we are preparing, we are working with that in a number of ways. I mean, one of the things that we focus on is building our graduate programs. And you heard about how we've added a number of graduate programs. We've also are looking to international enrollment. And so we have 2 full-time people who go out and recruit internationally. We also have contracts with a company that recruits students for us internationally. And we're also building our adult population programming on the undergraduate level. One of the other things that's really changing demographically is the makeup of the country. So really the only part of the population that is college-bound, traditional college-bound population, are students who are Hispanic and Asian. And particularly the growing part is the Hispanic population. So many schools, like PACE, have organized to build groups that look at what we need to do in order to support students who are from different ethnic backgrounds as they enter higher education. The second challenge that I think is worth noting is that is really the changed attitudes that people have about borrowing for their education. When I was growing up, it was always made very clear to me that an investment in your education was a very, very worthwhile thing to do, and if you had to borrow, it would return benefits throughout your lifetime. However, what we've seen over the last few years is a really changed attitude with regard to investing in your education. And I think to some extent that comes from how prepared students are when they graduate, how prepared they are for their careers. How prepared are they to get a job? And if they're graduating and within 6 months they have to start repaying their loans, how ready are they and able are they to do that? And that's one of the great things about working at PACE, is because really it's been part of our DNA to be always fixed on that outcome, always looking at how do you ensure that our students are prepared to hit the ground running when they graduate. And as you may have noticed in my title, I'm in charge of admissions, enrollment, getting people to come to the university, but I'm also in charge of the exiting part, so the career services piece. And that's because at PACE, we are really focused on, from the very beginning, we're focused on that outcome. What are our students going to do? How well prepared are they? And we are very experientially oriented so that students are ready for graduation and for their careers. The third big challenge, and I don't know how many of you follow it, but it's certainly something we're following very closely in higher education, is the rise of online education. And so we see everything from the for-profit sector building big enrollments in the for-profit online education opportunities like University of Phoenix. And then we're seeing this new sort of competitor emerge, which is known as a MOOC, or a massive open online course. And these are courses that are offered in some cases by the most prestigious universities in the world. And they're massive and online, meaning there are thousands of students in these courses. They're in almost every case, they're free. So right now, the value of those courses is not really a widely accepted in the world in terms of your credentials or your education. But we expect that will change over time. And so that's one of the things that PACE and every other institution of higher education is dealing with in this environment. And as we deal with that particular challenge, we look at what are the things that we do that add value to the educational process that are hard for online providers to do without taking on additional costs and essentially ending up looking like a traditional university. And here we turn again to this experiential education, to fundamental practices that are interwoven in the experience at Pace that combine what happens in the classroom with practical application. So things like internships or volunteer work or study abroad or research. And these are sometimes, or participating in a competitive team, like we have a team that participates in the Federal Reserve Challenge every year that's been very, very successful. But all of these activities allow students to take what they learn in the classroom and apply them practically in some way, in some co-curricular way, that helps really prepare them for their career, for what they will do next. And so this is one of the ways that PACE is positioning itself in this changing environment. As I was getting ready to talk to you, I spoke with Rebecca a little bit about, to try to find out what you would think would be, what you might be most interested in. And it was interesting to me that she said, you should really focus on some of the skills that you didn't expect would be important when you entered the nonprofit world. And two of those skills, and the two things that scared me the most when I came into enrollment management, were financial analysis and data analysis. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how important those two things are in my life at PACE. My background is in marketing. I came to Pace University as the AVP for marketing, and at sort of an important point when they needed an enrollment person or a chief revenue officer, which is really what I am at Pace, because we are 90+% tuition dependent. So we do not, like many other nonprofits, or unlike many other nonprofits, we do not depend on a philanthropy to make our payroll or to provide the services that we provide. And so tuition revenue is extremely important to us. And in my position, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer. When I stepped into this role, the first thing that I was told is watch your numbers, because it's all about numbers. And it really is. I mean, every single day I'm doing forecasting. One of my key hires was to bring a revenue an analyst onto the staff who could help me with those kinds of forecasts. In terms of marketing, the kinds of marketing that we do, we use predictive models in 4 different ways. We have 4 different kinds of predictive models at play when we're trying to figure out where we should spend our money on marketing. Who should get a view book and who should just get an email? Who should get a phone call and who should just get an email? Those kinds of decisions are made with the help of predictive modeling, all statistically based. Some of the things that I have to do on a day-to-day basis, I have to meet with people like rating agencies and talk to them about, give them the outlook. What does the outlook look like? Well, I don't know what the outlook looks like unless I read my data. So every single day I look at, how are we trending against this time last year? And there's a wealth of different indicators to look at, not just how many people have applied, but where do they come from? What kinds of incomes do they have? What do their SATs look like? What kinds of programs do they want to study? All of those things come into understanding who's going to be likely to enroll, who will be likely to be here, how much will the university have to support them in terms of university financial assistance. All those things, that's what makes up my day. And that's what makes up the kinds of things that I report to our Board of Trustees and our executive team and everyone else. I would say probably the other most important thing that I find in my position is the importance of having a good team. And some of my team members are here today from Career Services and from Admissions. And I have to say that hiring the right people, having the right people doing the right jobs is absolutely essential. You can't be good unless the people you surround yourself with are great. And so you're usually looking for people who are even better than you are. And as a result, there's some things that I put into place that not everybody was thrilled about at first. Like I see all the frontline hires in the admissions office. I want to know the people who are talking directly to our prospective students and parents. I want to know who they are. I want to know what they look like. I want to know if they're comfortable talking to people. It's not really a great job for an introvert. Those kinds of things. But also, all the way up the line, the people who you surround yourself with are really, really important. And that's why you have to make sure you have a great team. You have to make sure that you're willing and open to learn from your team, because ideally they do know more than you do about a lot of things. And if you're not open to hearing from them and you're not open to learning from them, you're nowhere. I mean, you're not going to grow, and the organization is not going to benefit. The other really important thing is collaborating across the organization. And I mentioned a little bit about how much I have to be focused on forecasting. Well, the people that I talk to the most who are outside of my direct area of responsibility are the CFO and the VP of budget. Because every day we're talking about, well, what is this particular new piece of information going to mean to the budget? What do we think is going to happen? How can we adjust? Do we need to do anything to adjust in order to meet the need? How are we going to frame this particular initiative to the trustees or to someone else? I mean, they're vitally important to me. The deans of all the schools and colleges are vitally important to me because they are the keepers of the programs. They are the people who are constructing and taking care of our students, constructing the programs that attract the students and make them successful. So really, the whole collaborative piece is extremely important as well. So I think that's it. I just want to end by saying again how very, very privileged I feel to be working in the nonprofit sector. I honestly get up every morning excited to go to work, and I don't think there are many people that can honestly say that after several years in the same position. And I honestly feel that what we're doing in higher education is extremely important to the future of the world. Thank you.
All right, we have one more speaker before we get to questions, and I know you have them, so I'm looking forward to moderating the questions. We will use a microphone, so everyone will be able to hear you. But our next speaker is Dr. Stacy Spencer, who brings 20 years of development to the field of what she's doing now with strategic fundraising. And she's currently the Senior Director of Institutional Giving for Advance New York. And that's heavily focused on consulting and fundraising to help all of you get your job done so you can really get out there and do what you want to be doing, which is not necessarily the development piece. It's ultimately the development piece supports your work. So Her specialty is actually helping clients identify and articulate their unique attributes for potential and current funders. She also, for the last few years, has been teaching for PACE. So if you want more of Dr. Spencer, just come on in and we'll have you sit in one of her classes. We've got plenty of opportunity to learn.
Right, Bill? So to begin, Dr. Takula had said that it would be nice to hear for some of you, the students, what my career has actually looked like, so that you can kind of, I mean, every career is different, everybody's going to have a different experience, but it might be interesting for you to see, I've had 20 years, you know, what that really looks like. So I'm going to first talk about that, and that's really more addressed to those of you who are thinking about entering the field of development or who might just be interested in that kind of focus. And then I'm going to kind of shift gears and start and talk more about the field in general and how it's changed really radically over the course of the 20 years that I've been in it. I began in development at a time that looked an awful lot like today. I was a newly minted PhD. I got my degree in 1991, so I'm dating myself here. And I had relocated to New York. I'm originally from Michigan. I had relocated in New York with my husband, who had joined a law firm. We really didn't want to leave New York. I was looking for academic jobs in my field, which was roughly American literature. I have a degree in American studies, but my area of expertise was American literature. And I was looking for a faculty position, and there were adjunct positions, but it was a really tough time. In 1987, a lot of you are too young to remember this, but there was something called Black Monday. The stock market had crashed. A lot of states had cut back on their funding for education. It was a rotten time for the academic job market, really, really brutal. There were, you know, maybe in my field nationally, maybe 5 jobs a year. So it was not fun. I spent a few years trying to get a job, but I really didn't want to leave New York, and in that area there were really none in my field that were like full-time, you know, permanent faculty jobs. I adjunct. But after a few years of that, I said, you know, I really got to try something else. This is not going to work. And so I started to talk to people, which is one of the best ways to figure out what to do in your career. And my husband had a friend he had gone to law school with who was heavily connected through her family to Yale University. And she said to me, well, what about development? At that time, we had no programs like this. At least if we did, I was not aware of them. They were very far and few between, nonprofit, you know, graduate programs on nonprofit work. It was something that people just kind of got in. I had no idea what the word meant. Development to me meant like real estate development. And I said to this friend of my husband's, Judy, I don't know anything about architecture or real estate. What are you talking about? And she said, no, fundraising. I know the people at the Yale, you know, development department. I could put you in touch with them. I think you'd be really good at it. It was like, at that point, I was willing to try anything. So I took the train up to Yale. I live in Manhattan. And I was hired. And I was the department-wide grant writer. So here I was, a newly minted PhD. I mean, I just spent like the past, you know, 7 or 8 years working on a dissertation and all of that, so I could write. And I was familiar with academic environments. So it was really a good match. That first year, I was in what was called the Corporate and Foundation Department. And Yale, unlike a lot of other universities, like Harvard or Columbia, has a consolidated development department. The only school that wasn't part of it at that time, and I think it's still the same, was their law school. Their law school had a separate development department. But the medical school, all the other graduate programs, the undergraduate college, the theology school, all of that was under our purview. And there were they changed over the time I was there, but there were about 8 senior medium level people. And they were the people who were really talking to the professors and figuring out what kind of things that we needed to fundraise for and hooking that up with the foundations. And then I was the person who would sort of go along with them and actually put pen to paper and write
the grants. It was a real baptism by fire. You know, it was like a great education because I had to do all these different projects. And that's one thing that I've noticed in, you know, in my rest of my life as a development expert is it can get kind of stale if you work for one organization because you're writing the same thing over and over. But there, it was like I did this big project for the theology school. I did stuff for the medical school. I helped to raise $20 million to build a new building from the Star Foundation for biomedical center building. So, I mean, it was, and I sat down with the dean of the medical school and he walked me through so I could write this because obviously I didn't know enough about, you know, the cutting edge field of biochemistry at the time. But he, you know, put it in plain English. He was really good at it, and I was able to write it and make, you know, the foundation could understand why this was important. I only stayed there a short time because I was commuting from New York, and so when I decided to start a family, I really realized that it was not going to work, that I was going back and forth to New Haven every day. So I stopped working for a wage for about 4 years when my daughter was young. But what I did do is that I volunteered for my alumni association. And I continued to do development work, and I actually worked really closely with the development department at Amherst College, and they gave me some of the best tips that I've ever. They have a crack development department there. They have the highest level of alumni giving of any college in the country. And the way that they do that is they hook people in when they're really young and when they can give nothing. And some places like Yale don't do that. They wait until they're old and they're rich, but then they're not interested in Yale anymore. And so they're really good, and it's like haunting. I'm looking at Cindy because she went there as well. If you move, like within 5 minutes, they have your address. I don't know how they do it, but they're really good. So I learned a lot, even though I wasn't making a living doing it. I kept my fingers in the profession, and I think that's one of the great things about development is that the flexibility. You can do it in so many different ways and come at it in so many different directions. And when I decided to go back to work, when my daughter was 4, I got a job at Barnard College, and it was not in institutional giving, which is where I've worked in every other area. So it wasn't grant writing, it wasn't looking at foundations, government, and corporations. It was in alumni affairs. So I was on the telephone a lot, and I was doing relationship building more than writing. And I was very good at it, but I discovered pretty quickly I didn't like it. And I think that's another lesson about development, if you're interested in going in specifically into development, is that there are a lot of different areas within development, and some have different skill sets. And so you can kind of find, like if you want to do special events, that kind of takes a different skill set than if you want to do what I do, which is corporate and foundation, which is mostly grant writing. It's more writing than being on the telephone. And you do have to go to meetings, and you do have to have people skills, but a lot of it is just sitting and writing or editing. At this point, I have a team of grant writers under me, so I'm not writing as much, but I'm still managing what's written. So I discovered that really didn't love that. And I was also traveling a lot, and I found that after the first couple times to be a little wearying, especially with a small child. So I left Barnard and I started freelancing. I had already people coming to me and saying, we'd love to have you do projects for us. It was really easy to get work. And I spent the next 8 years doing freelancing. I had it set up so that my main client was the public theater, and I worked there 3 days a week, and it was almost like a part-time position, even though I wasn't on staff. I had a desk and I had a telephone, and I went into the public theater and worked there 3 days a week, but it was very flexible. And then I had other clients as I could just find them, and most of those were more short-term projects. Somebody needed a National Endowment for the Arts proposal, or somebody needed, some templates created, so they weren't so many long-term projects. It's not a great way to get rich doing that, but it kept my skill sets going. It kept me alive in the profession, and I made enough money to survive. It wasn't getting as much money as I could for who I was, but it worked for me at the time. And again, it's that flexibility. You can really make this profession work for you at different stages in your life. which I think for women is a particularly, I don't want to say that it's not important for men, but I think for women, for obvious reasons, that's particularly attractive kind of thing. And then when my daughter was in middle school, about to go to high school, I decided that it was time to go back and really do full-time work again. And I had people calling me and asking me. And I had a friend who had become the director of development at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And she called me and said, "Stacy, are you ready to do full-time work?" And I said, yes. So I went to the Apollo, and that was my favorite job. That was the best job I've ever had. I loved the Apollo, and I always joke, like, how did a white girl from Michigan who cannot sing at all end up at the Apollo? But it was the most welcoming, wonderful, fun environment, and you would go to the bathroom and you could see the stage, because there was like this little area to go up the steps to go to the bathroom, and you'd look down and see everybody rehearsing. You know, it was just really amazing. But this I'll get to in a minute. This is kind of the downside of doing development work. Things change a lot. My boss left. The department kind of fell apart. So it wasn't there as long as I would have liked. And I felt that it was really like I kind of had to go. It was becoming too, even though everybody was lovely and wonderful, that when one person left that I was reporting to, and there was all this uncertainty, and somebody else contacted me and, said, "We'll give you a job." So I left. I'm still a little regretful about that because it was really a great job. I went to a cultural organization after that, which was like a big Fifth Avenue cultural organization. And I have to say, like Barnard, I really didn't like it. I discovered, I thought it was like the best move I was ever gonna make because I have a PhD in American Studies. This was more history oriented. I thought it was like gonna be a career maker. And it's like really, it was one of those things within like the first week I thought, whoa, I have made a big mistake. It just wasn't me. It was very staid and boring and kind of Upper East Side, and it just did not appeal to me. I felt like I was a round peg in a square hole there the whole time. So I stayed there about a year, and I left, last September, and a colleague of mine from the Public Theater for those years had started her own consulting firm. She was eager. Her specialty is individual giving and board development. Her husband does special events, but they did not have an institutional person. And so they were really eager as they're growing their business, and they brought me aboard. So I'm running their entire institutional giving department now. We have 4 solid clients. We do work for other smaller clients as well, and we're about to bring on, I think, 2 more clients. So it's been a lot of fun, and I work out of my home. I'm busier than I've ever been. I'm working harder than ever, but it's a new phase of my life, and I'm really, really pleased with it. It's going very well. Most of our clients, our solid clients, our 4 core clients right now, are all in the arts. My boss comes out of the theater world. We met at the Public Theater. We have a dance company, we have a theater company, we have a new play development organization, and we have a music education client. But we also are bringing on, I think, a social service agency. So I think we're growing beyond that, but our core and our expertise is really mostly in the arts. So that's sort of my history, that's my journey through development. You could stay in one place for your entire career. So, if you wanted to go into development, it could look very, very different from that. But that's the kind of thing that's not atypical. I know a lot of people in development, and this kind of pattern is not unusual. So that's sort of, if you choose to go that route, you can kind of tuck that in the back of your brain and think, these are your options, the pluses and the minuses. I think the pluses, just to summarize, are that it's very flexible, that you can really make it work for you at different stages of your life. It's a relatively open job market. There's a lot of need for fundraisers. Everybody's looking for them. If you're good at what you do, you're very marketable. The pay is good. When I was freelancing like that, it wasn't as good as when you're on salary and you're getting benefits and all of that. But if you want to stay in development and become the director of development, say someplace, I mean, you can easily, depending on the size of your organization, obviously bigger organizations pay more than little ones, but you can easily make 6 figures, sometimes more. If you're in an academic environment and you're the director or the vice president of advancement, it can be, your salary could be, really quite considerable. For nonprofit work, it's not like Wall Street, you're never going to get rich going into it, but that's not why you do these kinds of things. So that's a plus. I think what you were indicating, the biggest plus, is that you really feel like you are doing something socially useful. Like you're not just raising money to raise money, you're raising money for the organizations that you're working for. And that can be just very rewarding. You know that you're doing something that nonprofits, for the most part, can't exist without a development team. I mean, some have earned income, but most places, what you're doing, contributed income, is usually about 60%. It's supposed to be the other way around. I mean, you're supposed to have 60% earned income is considered healthy and 40% contributed, but I have never worked for an organization that had that model. I mean, I've worked mostly in the arts, so that's a little bit different than some of the other. But in the arts, it's easily 60, sometimes 70% what the development department brings in. So you're necessary. You really are needed. I think the minuses are that there's a lot of turnover. It's hard to be in one place for a long time, and so it sort of feels a little unstable sometimes. And the reasons why it's hard to be in one place for one time, it's a little hard to say, but I think a lot of it is that the departments tend to be small, and if you want to go to the next step, you almost always have to leave. There's very little movement up in where you are. It's not saying that it never happens, but it's rare. So people leave for that reason. In this particular funding climate, which at least in the fields that I'm in the arts, is really, really challenging right now, I also think that, it just can be frustrating raising money, and also there can be unrealistic expectations. I don't mean to be blasphemous, but I call it the Jesus Christ syndrome. That somebody new comes in and they think that you're going to perform miracles and walk on water, and then once you don't do that, in the 3 months down the road, people start to get disappointed in you. And I think there's a reluctance to understand that some of the funding difficulties that we have right now are structural. They're not about the person in that position. Anyone in that position is going to have these problems. The best fundraiser cannot move mountains. And so, there's just a lot of turnover because sometimes people are fired, but more often I think there's just a sense of disappointment that sets in. And I see that more now than I did back, 10 years ago when it was easier to raise money. So I think those two things are definitely linked. One other thing I wanted to bring up that can be a minus, though I don't think it bothers everybody in the same way. Sometimes it has with me, and so I'm just going to be honest. I sometimes feel like as a fundraiser, I'm not really part of the core mission of the organization. And even though I believe in it, I'm not the person doing the programming. I'm the person raising the money to do the programming. And so there's some organizations deal with that better. As I've gotten more senior and as I've gone through the profession, I think there are more and more of a recognition that development is really important and that this is part of our team. And the executive director often really sets that tone. When I was first at the Public Theater and we had one executive director, he wasn't that connected to development. I love the guy, but he wasn't that connected to development. The creative team there tended to be like, it was hard to get meetings with them. They were like you were bothering them, like if you had to go and get information about a report. How many people came to this play? What were the good things about this play? I have to write to the funder and tell them. They'd be like, I don't have time for this. And then a new executive director came in who was a much better a little more sophisticated, they just think about fundraising. And he set a different tone, and his creative team, I think, saw that he was meeting with the development people, and suddenly that became a lot easier to get those meetings and to get that information. So it can depend, but I sometimes feel like I'm kind of like on the outside always. And so that's just something that I've talked to other people in my field, and it doesn't bother them at all. And it's true if you're in finance or if you're doing legal services. So it's not just a thing about fundraising, but you have to think about that as you think about what area you might want to enter or how you want to enter the nonprofit field. I think that if I have an edge in the field, it's because I think that I'm somebody who's both creative but very disciplined. I come out of an academic and arts background myself, and so I know about the creative world. That's the most important thing to me, but I'm also somebody who's detail-oriented and disciplined and can get to work on time and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that that's kind of rare. I mean, not that I'm unique, but most people are kind of one or the other. They're either kind of more creative or they're kind of more disciplined, and it's not as common that you're both. And so if you're both, I think that you kind of have a little bit of an edge. I also think being a good writer is really gives me a great edge. I think when I first got into this field, I thought of it as a way, how can I make a living as a writer? So I still think of myself, I think primarily as a writer who happens to do this kind of writing for a living. And so that's really my kind of orientation, and I know that I've been hired over other people because of my writing skills. And so I really urge all of you, if you're interested in going into the field, to really work on your writing skills, because it really is critical. And I can't even tell you how many grant writers I see who can't write. And so it is really important. And I don't mean just that they don't use grammar properly, but they're very, dull and plodding, and nobody would really care about anything they're saying. And the good writing for development is the same as good writing for anything. I mean, it has its own style and it has its own tricks. But a good writing is good writing. It has to be interesting, it has to tell a story, it has to have engagement, it has to be factual. It has to do certain things that journalism would do. You can't make it up, but it has to be engaging, and that's something that a lot of people aren't terribly good at. And so if you're good at doing that, it will definitely give you a huge edge. My biggest piece of advice for anyone going into the nonprofit field is to choose to work in areas that you really care passionately about. Because the pay is good, but it's not that great, especially when you're starting out. And the hours are long, and it can be demanding. And if you don't have a passion for what you're doing, like if you're working in, I don't know, like you're doing some kind of educational work and you don't really care about kids that age. I mean, it's just going to be hard for you to get up in the morning and get, to really care about it. So if you can find something, and it doesn't have to be something you're an expert in. I have no theater background at all. I have nightmares about being on stage. I'm not particularly shy, but I'm not somebody who performs well. And yet I love working for the theater, because you don't have to be part of it to love it. But you have to care about it. So that's my biggest piece of advice. I have a close friend who's made his entire career in development, and he comes from the individual side, not the institutional like myself. He has done every job over his, almost 30 years in the field of preservation, like architectural preservation. He's worked for a lot of different organizations like World Monuments and Garden Conservancy and various places, but every single job he's had. And so he considers himself as much an expert on preservation as he does an expert in development. That is really great. I mean, I kind of wish that I'd been able to do that, but I don't, like the arts are a little bit different, but if you have an interest like that and you can make that work, that's, I think, the ideal place to be. So that's sort of my journey. Now I'm going to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about how I see over the course of what I just talked about, how the field has changed and where I think it's going. I had a really great talk recently at like 2 weeks ago at a foundation in Midtown that specializes in funding the performing arts, dance, music, theater. And they've been doing this for many years. And I came there with a small theater group. the president of the organization met with us, and he was a gentleman in his, I think, 70s. So he had really seen a lot of changes, and he was very chatty. And I basically, as I was listening to him, I said, "There's my talk." He just gave me my talk. And he started talking about, I think they funded the Public Theater for many years. He didn't know that I had worked there, so I was just listening to what he had to say, and it was very interesting to me. And he started talking about the changes that he's seen. And he started talking about Joe Papp, who you may know is the founder of Shakespeare in the Park and the Public Theater. Joe, for those of you who may not have heard of him, he's no longer living, he started the Public Theater, which was then the Shakespeare Festival, in the 1950s. And his thing was to bring an Americanized version of Shakespeare to America, to Americans. Shakespeare, he thought, had a fusty, sort of Britishy kind of crust on it at that point. He wanted to shake it loose, and he wanted to provide it for free. So what he would do is he assembled these actors, and he was the first major producer to do non-traditional casting. So he cast these people that were not in the British mode. They were Americans of all different stripes in traditional Shakespearean roles. And he took them, well, he didn't drive them there, but they went to neighborhoods in New York, like way out in the Bronx, way out in Brooklyn, and went to these kind of rundown parks and had a flatbed truck that they'd drive out there, park it at the park, and then do free Shakespeare. So that's how he did it. And this guy, the president of the foundation, said Joe Papp had 4 funders. And I knew that, because I had worked there. I kind of knew this history. And he said, everybody thinks it's because it was cheaper to do Shakespeare in the 50s than now. And he said, but adjusted for inflation, his budget was exactly what it is today. And he said what it was, and I'm like, yeah, he's right, because I know what the budget is. He said that was just the Shakespeare in the Park. Now there's the Public Theater, which is the downtown theater, and then there's Shakespeare in the Park. But the budget for Shakespeare in the Park was almost exactly what he said Joe Papp's budget was if you kind of, adjust for inflation. I was like, what? Really? I didn't know that, And he said he had no development department, which I knew. He did it all himself with his general manager. And the reason he was able to do that is because he had 4 funders. And he said, who were the 4 funders who funded him for almost 20 years? There was the New York State Council on the Arts, which gave him the equivalent in today's dollars. Shakespeare in the Park in today's dollars is about $8 million a year. New York State Council on the Arts, he said, gave them in today's dollars the equivalent of $3 million a year. NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, coughed up another couple million, and the rest was provided every year by Ford and Rockefeller foundations. That was their budget. And then when Joe wanted to go and do special things, he had this cadre of rich patrons that he could go to, and they would just say, yes, Joe, and write him a check. Or, no, Joe, I'm not interested. But they had no strings attached. And what he said really stuck with me, this foundation president. He said, I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. Joe Papp wouldn't be possible today because the society that created Papp no longer exists. Yeah. And he said civic responsibility was fashionable, and it isn't anymore. And he said there was not the market mentality that we have today. Everything didn't have to have market relevance to be important. And he even said, he said, the corporations in the 60s got into the act. He said PepsiCo really led with this. I don't know if this is true, but this is what this guy was saying. It sounded true to me, that PepsiCo had a president or a CEO at the time who was very committed to civic responsibility and really led the way for other corporations to create corporate philanthropy. And so this guy went on and said, today government is gone, corps are gone, and foundations are a shell of what they used to be. This is mostly for the arts. And he said, and that's really not going to change at any time soon. We now get tiny little grants from NISCA. If you're lucky if you get 7,000 or 8,000 a year, as opposed to the 3 million. So that's a really huge difference. And it reminded me that when I was at the Apollo, we had gone to meet with the sort of third in charge at one of the largest banks in the country, in the world. And it's a bank you've definitely heard of. And she sounded like she might be interested in giving us some money. And in the past, we had gone through their corporate philanthropy arm, which had just shrunk to almost nothing. So we were meeting with her, who was really in corporate sponsorship. And she knew my executive producer at the Apollo really well. So they had a history. So they were kind of jockeying back and forth. And the producer at the Apollo, his name is Mickey Shepard, was talking about, all the wonderful programming that we had, especially the educational programming, which she thought this bank might really be interested in. And this woman from the bank turned to Mickey and said, "Mickey, I know what you want. You want philanthropy. But we don't do that anymore. We do marketing. You give me something I can market, and I'll market it." So that's a big change. A lot of companies have eliminated their corporate philanthropy, or they've shrunk them down to very small grants. I mean, even Target, that in the past couple of years, I've gotten $25,000 grants for a lot of the organizations I work with for children's education. I went to their website, and they're now outside of Minneapolis, where they're headquartered. They only are giving $2,000 a year grants. That's a big difference. It's a huge difference. And they have to be, this is another trend that I just find really peculiar. They have to involve third grade education. Third grade education. They only give grants that involve third grade education. And I talked to the guy who's the head of their corporate philanthropy, and he said because they felt like they wanted to choose an area where they can really make a difference. Yeah, it does matter, but with giving $2,000 a year grants, you're going to have to give a lot of $2,000 to really impact that field, and you're going to have to stick with it for a lot longer than they're probably going to stick with it. The likelihood of them really making an impact on third grade education, it just seems like an odd thing. I mean, when you think of Target, do you think third grade education? I don't know. It's just why? And it's for an it's just frustrating because none of my organizations do third grade education, it's just who does third grade education other than schools?
It's not third grade education, it's about what happens to a child when they're in third grade.
Yeah, but that's...
It's when they start becoming a critical thinker.
Right.
And so if somebody learns to think critically, you can really affect their whole worldview.
I understand,
so
but
that's why the third grade.
But it's just frustrating from my point of view, trying to get money, is that very few of my nonprofits focus solely on third grade education, or third graders and 8-year-olds. So where are we? What does that mean? It means, have I gone on too long?
I don't have my watch, actually.
It means that, I'll hurry it up. It means that your individual giving and your board of directors are really what's really important. So those have become far more critical to the fundraising environment than they used to be. There's not the balance maybe that there used to be. Now it's really more about your board connections, more about your individuals than it used to be. So that's just, that's the reality that we're in. I do think that some things have remained constant though, even as all of these things have changed. Relationships still really matter a lot. And I think it's really important to be honest with your funders, which is something that I hear a lot from funders. I wish that our organizations were more honest with us. I think your mission really matters. And that's something that I think sometimes when we get desperate for money, we forget that we really have control over that, like what you were talking about. That's exactly it. Excellence matters. If you do what you do really well, you're going to get more money than if you do it in a mediocre fashion. Excellence really, really matters, and good leadership matters. These things matter. They've always mattered. They matter, if anything, even more today. So where are we going? One thing that I'll leave you with is that yesterday's New York Times had the headline, Dow reaches record high. I really wonder how we can convince corporations to come back to that civic responsibility. I think the potential's there. I don't see it happening anytime soon. I'm not holding my breath, but I think that there's that potential, and I guess, eternal optimist that I am, I sort of hope that maybe that'll turn around a little bit. I don't think it's going to happen quickly, but I'm hoping that maybe does. I think that boards will continue to be even more necessary for the financial health of an organization than they've ever been, and so building your board is critical. But mostly, I think that for your organization to be successful in fundraising, but to be successful in everything that it does, I tell my clients this, that you have to do something uniquely well. It doesn't have to be unique. Very few organizations are unique, but do it uniquely well. Define something that you do and that you do it very well. So there we go.
All right, it's going to be time for questions, and I just wanted to take a minute to point out 6 trends that I saw just among the panelists, and this is before even getting out into your questions. Aside from the plug for writing, all of you who have had to suffer through my classes, and you know how much writing is involved, thank you, Stacey. I really appreciate that. It's worth it. All right. So the trends that everyone's been talking about is really continuously scanning your environment. It was said in one way or another, look at what's going on around you, because you need to be forecasting. You've got to be predicting on where you need to be, where you need to go. And as Stacey was also saying, at what's uniquely yours, but focusing on how you're remaining relevant. The next is flexibility. Every single person spoke in some element about being flexible, and resiliency comes from that. Next is that future focus. I think that's one of the things that we're all looking at, and we're trying to figure out how best we can maintain that focus. Then also how our fundamental mission is ensuring success for our clients, whoever they may be. It might be a patient, it might be another organization, it might be somebody who's going to school. How do we define success? And it's uniquely yours, but that's really fundamentally what you're here for. Maintaining that mission focus gets you there. Next, collaboration and networking. You're going to keep hearing that again and again and again. That's what it's all about. We're all connected and we're global. So we have to think about that in that way. And then the leadership. Ultimately, it's about leadership. So without any further ado, I think our panelists have been wonderful. We have one over here.
Hi, my name is Dr. Roshan Sheikh, and I'm from a charitable organization. I'm one of the directors there. The question, I just pick up the cue from our last panelist, that with increasing corporate profits, why charity contributions are so low? Any reasoning, rational on that?
I don't know. I mean, I think.
I wonder if it's spreading the wealth. Instead of Target giving out, and because my math is not always strong without a calculator, 10 grants at $25,000 each. I can now give 100 grants at $2,000 each, and so everybody knows how wonderful I am.
But the giving
It's marketing.
giving is definitely down. I mean, a lot of the departments even that they used to distribute money don't even exist anymore in many cases. So I think that they've just decided, as to benefit their shareholders and to strengthen their businesses, that it makes more sense for them to put their money in marketing efforts than it does. That if they're going to fund an organization, there's got to be some benefit to themselves, that they're not just in the charitable business.
They're becoming more selfish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, why they've decided that, I'm not sure. I actually think they're kind of wrong.
I just think it's part of the whole philosophy of not feeling responsible for your fellow man kind of thing. It's like, this is a business, this is not a giveaway.
Exactly,
Kind of
yeah.
thing.
Well, I just have to say, on behalf of corporate philanthropy, I'm not sure I agree with what I'm hearing. I think that just as changes occurred over time, basically I represent a corporate foundation, and we listen to our employees. So to a great degree, our employee base is sort of informing us what they think is important. So in your case of Shakespeare in the Park, that's of no interest to our employees. So that wouldn't be something we would be supporting anymore. I mean, it may have been relevant in the 50s or 60s or 70s. It's not relevant today. And there is the pressure from the shareholders. The shareholders are saying, you know, give us more dividends, and you know, we'll make the decision of how to give the money away. Not all of them, but I think in the case of the company I work for, we've expanded our corporate responsibility significantly over the past, I've been there 29 years, so over the last 29 years.
Good.
And we do it in different ways, so it's not all about writing checks. We've got a much stronger volunteer program, and I think you'll see many, many companies, PepsiCo being one, IBM being another, that is very focused on using their employees as, you know, the intellectual capital that their employees can bring to the table. And we do that also. I think Hitachi does that. I don't want to take up the whole time, but I think when you think about change, you can't just say that corporations have gotten out of the corporate responsibility business, but they may have changed how they do it, why they do it, and I think that's one of the evolutions of, I always tell people, you know, don't get too comfortable with a corporate foundation, because the whole thing could change tomorrow. You know, the new leader comes in and they say, I don't like this anymore, or I don't like this at all, why are we doing this? And so, you know, you go through these evolutions, but, you know, the fact is that if you can keep your programming relevant to what the corporate foundation is interested in over time, you know, you're in good shape. But you know, there aren't too many programs that we've been with years. How long? 15 years? Okay, so there's one, 15 years, and it's been a progressive increase, right? As you've expanded, we've expanded. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I think I just want to respond in a question form to is there a way as a nonprofit, this guide star to find out so people can check and see how we do what we do. Is there a way for us to give feedback to the corporate sector to say, it's really wonderful that you do volunteer opportunities, but for me to train your 8 people to come and spend 3 hours with me, it's going to take 28 hours of our paid staff to get to put together something so that you can have something for them to do. Which is actually taking away. I mean, I wouldn't walk into a corporate office and say, hey, I've got a master's degree in public policy, put me to work for 4 hours, because they would say, we don't have anything you can do for us. And the expectation that a check for $1,000 is of less value than paying their employees for that $1,000 of work to come in is not necessarily the disconnect is the challenge for me. And then if we could help corporate, if there could be a guide star for corporate philanthropy that lets us give feedback that says, you know, these people do it really well and they are really good and responsive to the needs of the nonprofit sector, as opposed to we give them a lot of free marketing for being so wonderful to us.
No, and I think you raised an important point, and it's how do we strike the right balance? Because people want to be engaged civically, and the corporate sector does want that level of commitment and involvement and want to bring that. But the reality is we also need the cold hard cash, and we've got to have the staff capacity to handle volunteers. And I've dealt with that with volunteer management issues for a long time. How do we manage the volunteers coming through? And if you're not at the level where you can have a whole team to do it, it can be debilitating. So there's got to be this balance, and how do we strike it is the
How do you have a
question.
conversation in a way that's healthy for both?
Right, right.
So we're not saying, oh, they're so mean to us. We're not, and they're not saying, they're always whining about it.
And they don't want us,
How
right.
do we improve the conversation so it's not us versus them?
Yeah, good.
It is a collaborative relationship.
Okay, well, and conversations like this are a good start.
And I just might offer the idea that maybe you would partner with another nonprofit so that in doing something collaborative, in allowing for that volunteer experience, so it's not such a drain just on one organization, but you bring 2 organizations together, each one contributes to the training. I'm thinking, I work with a local museum, and they do a lot of that kind of thing. They'll partner with like a children's group, or it usually is either educational group or a children's group, and so that when they offer volunteer opportunities, it's not just on them to do that.
I don't need a microphone, I can speak louder than anybody here.
Well, I had actually a comment, sort of, and on that. When I heard about the eight volunteers coming in through every once in a while, whether it's weekly or however you have your program set up, I saw that, I'm on the individual fundraising side, so I saw that as an opportunity to have 8 people who are potential donors coming into my office or my mission every week or something. So that's one way that we can sort of maybe work together on the volunteering side and on the fundraising side.
A theme that I saw was the idea of get them when they're young, which I think is so true, and the importance of local and the importance of relationships. I think people want to see where their money is going, and when you're younger, it's easier to do that, and where your work is going, where your volunteer work, where your money. So the idea of local involvement with young people, and a young person can do that work. You know, you send money to a national organization, and you know, you don't know where it goes. You give money to a local organization. I'm involved with an organization that gives money to scholarships for our own kids. And all the money we raise goes to scholarships for those kids. So you really, you know, literally can see where it goes to young people. And so to then involve them when they're successful in giving money to others, you know, scholarships for other kids. But I think that's, you know, a meta trend to really think about.
I don't need the microphone. I'm Grant Lovenbrook, and I teach here. I teach grantsmanship every summer one. Come around May 30th and you'll see the same kind of strategies that you're talking about. The panel, I'm hearing the word diversity of funding sources as a key thing. Don't get too reliant on one or two sources. I'm hearing the implication of partnerships. Partner all year long with the foundation people, the government people, do partnerships and joint projects, not only with another not-for-profit, do it with local government. Sometimes they have access to money that you don't, and vice versa. I appreciate this opportunity, and if you're adventurous, you'll come back and take my course summer one. I've never taught grantsmanship that I didn't have a student get real money. I hope to see you this summer.
Thanks, Grant. Shirley?
Hi, I am an alumni of the MPA program, and in 2012 I founded and launched a nonprofit organization. We provide resources and support to first-generation Latino students so that they can successfully enroll and go to college. My question to you is, as a brand new organization, my biggest challenge has not been program development or strategic planning. I was well prepared for that. Unfortunately, I didn't take Dr. Lovenbrook's class. So the fundraising and development portion of my work as executive director has become the most challenging piece for me. I'd like to obtain some advice from you as to, our staff is small, primarily made up of interns and volunteers and myself. I don't have a development manager, and there's so many ways that I can spread myself thin. Individuals, corporations, foundations, we're targeting a couple of these areas. But there's a catch-22. You need to have 3 years proven program success. You need to have had long credibility in the community to attract individual donors. So it's almost like a spinning wheel. What advice can you give to a new organization such as mine that I think has great potential and opportunity, or sincerely is striving to reach out for development?
I would start with your board and see what kind of, I don't mean just like how much fundraising your board can do, but what kind of contacts do they have with the foundation world or with other friends of theirs who might be willing to write a check or just come to learn more about your program. So I think that until you really establish a track record, I think that your board is probably your best. And it probably will be easier, to start with your individual fundraising through contacts that you have or people that you know, and just start building that outward than it will be to get foundation or government money when you're a really young organization. So once you have a couple years track record, and once you have some of that funding base from individuals, you'll have an easier time getting the foundation and government money. I think that you might be able to get some smaller grants even in those areas if you had your board connections. But they would be like you would want to go with your board member and have meetings. You want to get out and sort of tell your story. And it can take a while, but you have to just start like getting out and meeting people in the funding world. Some foundations, they vary hugely. Some places are very open door and they will make a meeting and you can come in and sit down and talk to them. Others really are not welcoming that way. So you just sort of have to try it and find out. Pick up the phone and call people or email them. One thing you can do is you can send like one letter, like one-page emails to foundations, just like introducing yourself, not really saying, I'm applying for money right now, but will you give me any advice? You can say, this is the kind of thing that I'm doing. Does this interest you? Would you advise me to apply? And that way you're just telling them about yourself. It's a brief email. It's like maybe 2 paragraphs. And a lot of the time they will reply. And they'll give you advice. So it's just that kind of relationship building. Best of luck to you. It's really, it sounds like you're doing wonderful work.
I would also like to say it's probably worthwhile focusing on individuals from the Hispanic and Latino community that have been very successful, or companies that are focused on that market. And there are so many. I mean, just like colleges and universities are recognizing that this is a very important population moving forward, and we really want to be committed to being a part of the educational growth of this population. But there are many, many companies who are also seeing how the demographics are changing in the United States and how they really need to connect with this new and big burgeoning market.
Part of what I heard you say was that you lacked the time and staffing capacity to do these very things. And I would say to you, back to one of the first points of what the opportunity was for nonprofits now and a challenge for them, is outsourcing. And there are, if you look at your local chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals or the Association of Development Officers, there are more and more firms and individuals these days who will work with you one-on-one to put together a development strategy, and you can outsource some of that function and get people helping you with strategy, putting together a framework, and doing some of this actual work for you that then when you're in a bigger position, you can then insource again when you're ready to bring in full-time staff. But it's a way to get access to expertise that you wouldn't be able to afford, and to get the real diversity of skills that you might need. Look at AFP, look at ADO, and start looking at some firms there. There'll be people who are more than happy to help you figure out what you need.
Good advice. And I think we had hands up here.
Rowena, you mentioned challenges in the educational sector. What about retention of students? You said that you're looking forward to statistics and stuff like that, but specifically, what are you doing or can do to retain the students?
Well, it's really interesting the way retention statistics are calculated by the federal government. So when they look at graduation rates and retention, they are only looking at students who enter as first-time, full-time students and stay at the same institution until they graduate. That's the only students who are counted currently in the federal statistics. So anybody who starts at a community college doesn't count. Anybody who starts at who starts somewhere and then transfers doesn't count. Anybody who starts somewhere part-time and then later goes full-time or finishes their degree in some other way doesn't count. So this year was actually the first year that an organization called the National Clearinghouse was first tried to actually come up with a real graduation rate for the country. And it's something like 20% higher than the federal statistic. And it's because the way the federal government has been tracking students, it hasn't taken these things into consideration. And so many students do things like start off at community college or start off part-time or drop down to part-time at some point or change institutions. And one of the things that we've seen in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years is the prevalence of students transferring. And they transfer for any number of reasons, anything from, I'm too far away from home, I'm not far enough away from home. That school doesn't have, I've changed my major. Something like 60% of college students when they enter college are undecided. They don't know what they want to do, and who can blame them? Sometimes I still don't know what I want to do. So, retention is sort of a tricky thing to talk about. I think the key thing for any university is we're all looking to start retention with recruitment, meaning that when, part of these models that we build and everything are built upon what do the students look like who are successful here? What do they look like? The students who stay, who like it here, who graduate. That's part of what you try to recruit to your institution, because you want people who are going to be successful and who are going to be happy at your university. But then once you get them on board, it's also, engagement is a really, really big piece. Getting students to be engaged. And, again, tricky with the trends prevalent in society right now of students spending a lot of time communicating online or, in all these not very personal ways, getting those students to come out of that cloud and actually engage as part of a community face-to-face can be challenging. But then again, that's where these co-curricular activities are so important. Really building upon the classroom experience by providing things embedded in the experience that build on what they learn in the classroom, and then they're able to apply in other parts of the experience.
I think it was behind you. He did.
I just want to underscore, going back to Stacy, her comments about the importance of boards. I've worked with 70-some boards in the last 10 to 12 years, and I've seen every possible
He's a real
configuration. And I would say it's very hard work, but I have 3 suggestions to I don't know the name of your organization, but I have 3 suggestions. One is look at the February 28th issue of Chronicle. Philanthropy has an excellent article under their toolkit section on boards and how to recruit for them. Some very interesting stuff. Secondly, maybe you've done this, but check in with the Hispanic Federation. They do provide local help. I have a friend who's on that board. I'd be happy to introduce you to that. If you're interested in that, and And besides that, I think that, well, just 2 suggestions. I'll quit there. Thanks.
Zachary in the back.
Hi, my name is Zachary Swear. I'm with an agency called the Volunteer Center. A common thread that I noticed going through a lot of the presentations was the importance of internal communications within an organization, especially when it comes to the relationship between the development office and the frontline players, especially those who are administering program. I'm wondering, can anyone provide a little bit of guidance on how best you can facilitate internal communications within an organization?
Yeah.
With me, people joke about how much time I spend in meetings because it's pretty much all my time. But to me, nothing is more important than getting to know people, right? So, I mean, PACE is, it's not a small organization, a couple thousand people. I don't know everyone. But I do make it a point to really engage with my colleagues in different departments. I do work on lots of committees, some of which have almost nothing to do with my direct area of responsibility, but just are important in terms of building relationships and building the organization and making the organization better. So I think my answer to that would be keep it personal. Yeah, you can have tons. I've worked in the university communications office, at marketing and communications. Pretty much every problem that's ever cited is a failure of communication. So, and the answer always is, well, we need a publication for that, or we need a, and I think that very rarely really solves communication problems. I think being there is important. I go to every faculty council meeting. I'm there. I'm often not on the agenda, but I'm always there. I'm always networking before and after the meeting. My staff goes to the student government organization meetings. We usually don't have any real purpose to be there, but we're there just in case, and to build some, to better understand students' needs, to better understand, better get to know them.
It opens doors as well, because now you're approachable. Your
Right.
department is somebody's connected everywhere.
So I'd say be out there, be visible.
I second that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we'd all concur
Yeah.
on it's the relationship building for all of that. I would just like to, before I turn it over to Dr. Tequila, I'd like to thank our panelists for a great panel and our audience. I'd like to thank the Wilson Center and Hitachi for once again putting together a really great opportunity. Don't forget the networking piece of it today, so we can continue some of our conversations.